This is the Voigtlander Bessamatic single lens reflex camera that was announced to the market in 1958. And I'm Laszlo Vasco, and this is my Micro Adventures channel. We've been tracing the story of cameras, starting with roll film being available in the 1890s, looking at each decade, and now we're looking at the 1950s. By the time this was announced in 58, single lens reflex cameras were starting to flood onto the market. Single lens reflex concept itself traces its roots back to the 1860s with large format cameras, and then in the 1930s, manufacturers like the Camera Werkstätten, or KW, started to make medium format single lens reflex cameras like this Pilot 6 using 120 film, and that established basically the foundations for cameras like the Hasselblad that came later on. And then IHG, also in Dresden, Germany, launched their Exacta series aimed at professionals, remarkably sophisticated camera for the time. In 51, they launched the EXA series aimed at consumers with a top speed of only 1/150th of a second, a much simpler shutter system, but still a single lens reflex camera, obviously, aimed at the mass market. And both of these manufacturers, with KW also launching their Praktika series, were evolving these systems in, by then, East Germany. In Japan, we had Asahi launch the Asahi Flex in 1951 as the first Japanese single lens reflex cameras, and there were a number of other manufacturers. And contemporary to Voigtlander, we had Minolta launch their SR series, also in 1958, and then we had Canon coming out with the Canonflex in 1959, and Nikon launching their sort of groundbreaking Nikon F series in 1959 as well. What makes the Voigtlander camera somewhat unique in the long history of single lens reflex cameras is the use of a leaf shutter. Now, it wasn't unique to Voigtlander. They were not the first to use leaf shutters in single lens reflex cameras, but now looking back, and the fact that focal plane shutters established themselves as the standard, it is somewhat of a unique beast. And indeed, there are pros and cons to the leaf shutter system. One of the pros is that it allows flash synchronization at all shutter speeds, whereas the focal plane shutter is limited to speeds of, back then, potentially at best 1/60th of a second. Basically, the shutter needs to be fully open for the flash image to register, whereas with leaf shutters, they're circular and they open all the way up. So whereas the top shutter speed on these cameras was 1/500th of a second, as opposed to 1,000th or 1/2000th, it did allow for flash to be synchronized at all speed, including at 1/500th of a second, allowing some great, action or sports-oriented images. And leaf shutters were also quieter. One of the benefits these days is that they tend to be more reliable from this era. So if you get early single lens reflex cameras, or rangefinder cameras for that matter, usually the focal plane shutters were made of silk or cloth. They deteriorate over time, they can bend, and the mechanism itself is harder to repair. Whereas with the metal leaf shutter systems, if it gums up, which is one of the common issues with them, but if it gums up, you could take some lighter fluid and dab it onto the shutter itself and be back in business. So there's definitely some advantages, but there is the disadvantage of complexity that these manufacturers dealt with. Leaf shutters, they must be behind the lens because of their, because they're circular, so the image needs to project through them onto the film, and this poses a number of challenges. So if you think about it, and let's move the lens here and walk through the sequence of events. Right now, the shutter is cocked, and I'm able to view through through the lens and compose the image. And when I press the shutter button, what will happen is, this was a 1 second exposure, what happens is then the shutter needs to very quickly close down, allowing the mirror to be flopped up. Now the shutter must open back up, expose the image for the proper time, and close back down. On some cameras, then they built in the ability to have an instant return mirror where the mirror would drop down. Voigtlander would make the Ultramatic in the 60s that allowed for that. On this particular one, you have to wind it to bring the mirror back down and then open up the shutter. So a lot more complex compared to a focal plane system. But taking a look at some of the other features, though, there was something unique with the Bessamatic. It was the first camera that introduced a light meter built in right into the camera. It's a selenium meter, so it doesn't require any batteries. And it was linked to both the aperture and shutter speed. So basically, it was a coupled meter. And established the match meter needling system right in the viewfinder that we saw others adopt later on. I mean, indeed, in this era, what you had was the idea of, well, either you had a handheld meter or you had these clip-on meters that manufacturers would make, like this one that Canon made. Minolta, Nikon, others had similar contraptions that clipped on, and then they attached to the shutter speed dial. But obviously, you still have to read off and match up the aperture because it didn't link to the aperture, and of course you had to separately look on the top and read that off. So that was a novelty, and in all other aspects as well, the Bessamatic, I mean, the leaf shutter systems came out in the early 50s. The Compure Shutter came out with their reflex shutter in 1951 that was first adopted by the Canonflex, subsequently Zeiss, and Kodak with their Retinaflex cameras manufactured them. And by the time Voigtlander introduced it in 58, it was well established. So they were able to take the best features and make a very reliable camera. That is one of the other aspects of this, is that out of all the leaf shutter systems, you could argue that the Voigtlander was the most refined and reliable. So let's continue on with some of the other unique features. I've mentioned that the meter is coupled to both the aperture and the shutter speed. And the way this is done, to keep it simple, is that unlike other companies where the aperture ring is on the lens, the aperture ring here stays on the body. And this made the coupling to the light meter a lot simpler and straightforward. And it also makes the lens, well, it's not the main reason, but the lenses are pretty neat and small for this system. So one of the other cool things with these lenses, and this was called the DKL Mount. A couple other manufacturers used it, including the Kodak Retina cameras. They were all a little bit different, so you have to do some filing and adjusting if you wanted to mount one lens to the other, but you're able to indeed figure out a way to mount some additional lenses for it. Not that you really need to. The Voigtlander series of lenses were just top-notch, and you had a great variety for the Bessamatic that you were able to obtain. The one I have here is the Color Scoper 2.8, f2.8 50mm lens. They also had f2 lenses for it, the Septon, what they call the Septon in 50mm, and the 40mm f2 Scopagon lens, which many claim is literally the best lens ever manufactured by any manufacturer, or one of the best lenses ever manufactured. That one is quite pricey, so I don't have that one. And Voigtlander also introduced the Zoomar, the first zoom lens for the system. So it's a really neat system to use and collect with the variety of lenses that you could get for it. And they're just super cool in the fact that they're super small and really nicely manufactured. So this is, as I mentioned, the 50 millimeter. The 35 is even smaller, and here is the 135 millimeter f4. So also a very compact lens. It's a shame we don't quite see compact lenses like this anymore for our full frame systems these days. These were simpler formulas, but that still produced wonderful images. So with the shutter speed and lens, shutter speed and aperture being right here on the body, you were able to adjust the combinations with this ring. What's unique is that this ring turns both the aperture and the shutter speed at the same time. So they remain interlocked for the same light value, basically. And to actually adjust the exposure, you would use this knob on the top left. And this is what would then turn the aperture dial independently, allowing you to adjust the EV setting and basically matching up the needle in the viewfinder. Furthermore, they had added some light adjusting values that matched up to their filters. For back in the day, people used a lot of filters for black and white photography in particular, and the different filters had different adjustment values that Voigtlander listed here, so you were able to adjust your exposure. It would automatically compensate with the light meter. And finally, on the right side, we've got a very smooth winder that is quite, I'm not sure if, it's quite sort of heavy, but very smooth. And of course, you've got this gorgeous leaf shutter sound coming out of it too. On top of it, you had a simple reminder for the type of film you would load, and you had a lever to push forward to rewind the film. And then in the back, you have your exposure counter that had to be manually reset each time you would load or prior to loading film. So it wasn't automatic. And one reason for that is that it counted down. So if you had a 36 exposure film, you would put it in. With the rewind lever pressed forward, you were able to manually basically roll the counter roller and adjust, set it to 36, or if you had a 20 exposure film, set it to 20, and then it would then count downwards. So that's about it for the features. Otherwise, it is a camera that is great to handle and use. This is sort of unique, setting your exposure with it, so that's totally different. And in fact, somewhat also confusing. At the same time, I'm shooting with the Voigtlander Prominent. Voigtlander had a thing with left knobs, using it for something. But on the Prominent, the left knob focuses the camera, which is actually, quite a pain in reality. But it's even more of a pain if you're using both systems. And I imagine people who had the Prominent probably added the Bessamatic to it, and now it was, sort of chaotic that on this camera, I'm using the left lever to focus, but on this one, I'm using it to adjust the exposure. So somewhat of a unique charm to these cameras, and what makes their handling a little bit different compared to other cameras. So let's take a look at the images that we obtained from these. And some of these initial images were on my commute into Cambridge. As you could see, the Voigtlander lenses, they have a great color rendition, great contrast, and great sharpness. These subsequent images were from Rockland, Maine, stumbling on a VW Beetle parked alongside the road. And again, beautiful rendering that you get with these older lenses. I think the Tessar design is the 4-element tessar design is just a great design. It's very sharp in the center, it has a great roll-off, it's still plenty sharp in the corners, and it just has a great rendition that is just different than today's well-adjusted, clinically sharp lenses. And then finally, with the my brick wall tests that I sometimes get to do, you can see that indeed, the 35mm here, as well as the 50mm, and then finally the 135mm lenses are quite sharp edge to edge. So, considerations for adding this to your collection. Well, if you're a Voigtlander fan, I bet you already have one of these in your collection. But if you're not, it is a wonderful camera to add to your collection for a couple of reasons. I'm not sure that it is really collectible per se. There was a fairly large number of these that were made. About 140,000 of these were manufactured over a decade, from 58 to, or 59 to 69. So they're readily available. And I think because they were so reliable, there's many available for sale. So hence they're not very expensive. And that's, I think, one of its great benefits, is that you get a beautifully engineered, I mean, really, the top of the line from an engineering and build perspective from that era. I don't think you can get any better from this. I mean, it certainly feels much better made, to be honest, than the Minolta or the Canon. I mean, these are really fun cameras to shoot with, but they do not have that dense feel that the Voigtlander does, both in terms of holding it and just winding and actuating the shutter. And also the lenses are also easily available, except for some of those highly collectible ones like the Zoomar. That's pretty expensive, and it's a pretty neat lens. But the other lenses are readily available, easy to buy, and then with a top shutter speed of only 1/500th of a second, you don't really need to get the fast lenses, in my opinion. And the f2.8s are very sharp, so the kit that you put together is definitely, you'll get amazing images from it. It's well usable. With this, you get a different shooting experience. So for those reasons, from I guess a unique shooting experience perspective, the lens availability, the price of this, I would highly recommend it. So if you haven't seen my 1950s overview video, take a look at that. And please subscribe to then come around. I'll be reviewing the Minolta SR series, as well as the Canon Canonflex. So these are the other two single lens reflex cameras that we'll be reviewing in the 1950s. And I'm again shooting with the Prominent and the Voigtlander Prominent and the Minolta Super A, and I'll be putting out those reviews as well. So hope to see you soon.